Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this after evening in March. I am so happy to provide a this workshop for you today, and we'll just get right started. And if there's anyone else joining us, they'll probably can join us later, as well as we will be recording this webinar so that you would have the opportunity to access it later on YouTube. Feel free to ask any questions throughout in the question and answer, as well as we'll do some polling questions. And you can also use the chat feature if you wanted to send us a message and let us know your thoughts throughout the presentation. Before we start, I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement. We are currently located on the lands of the people of the Mississauga-Uskugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Treaty and the traditional territory of the Mississauga, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people, and we acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of the settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, remember the history of these lands have been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. I'd also like to acknowledge anti-Black racism is defined here as policies and practices rooted in Canadian institutions, such as education, healthcare, justice, that mirror and reinforce beliefs, attitudes, prejudices, stereotyping, and or discrimination towards people of Black African descent. The term anti-Black racism was first expressed by Dr. Kua Benjamin, Ryerson social work professor, who highlights the unique nature of systemic racism on Black Canadians and the history as well as experiences of slavery and colonization of people of Africa, Black African descent in Canada. I'd also like to acknowledge that while Black people within Canada have experienced anti-Black racism, Canada has done little to recognize their contributions and their experiences within Canada, as well as to address the system of racism that impacts our young people, to our individuals, to our families. And Kajenga Wellness Project is proudly sponsored by the Ontario Trillium Foundation and working in collaboration with Carrier Community Health Centre. So welcome everyone today to our webinar. We are joined today by Stephanie. There she is. Stephanie Belen, who's going to do a discussion with us on co-parenting, a deep dive in shifting perspectives. I'll let her go ahead and provide the workshop, but definitely something needed in terms of us working together with families, something to think about in terms of co-parenting or living in multi-system families with grandparents and aunties, as well as we need to consider, how do we work together to focus on the best needs for the children within the family. So thank you so much for this very needed talk.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here to speak with all of you today. To introduce myself, my name is Crispelen. I am a registered social worker in Durham, Ontario. I do have about 13 years of experience working in the child welfare sector, but I also have a private practice which focuses on co-parenting support and parenting plans for families that need that extra help and assistance. So with that, I am going to jump in and begin. Okay. So today's workshop is co-parenting, a deep dive in shifting perspectives. I'd like to thank the Kujenga Wellness Project for welcoming me and having me here today. My contact information is below, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So what are the goals? What are we going to be doing in this workshop? I am going to briefly review adverse childhood experiences and how that has an impact on our children, and why co-parenting and the ability to co-parent effectively is such a key factor in being able to mitigate against negative experiences by our children as a result of family separation. We're going to touch a little bit on cultural implications, and I thank Nicole for mentioning and talking about anti-Black racism. We're just coming out of Black History Month, and we know that in Canada, there is a long history of systemic racism and anti-Black racism here. So we are going to talk about how that looks and comes into play for co-parenting families, specifically Black co-parenting families. I myself am a person of color. My experience is not the same, but there is an understanding of a history of oppression and a history of racism. And it's so key, and this is why I think Kujenga is amazing. It is so key that people have access to services that understand, recognize, and acknowledge how that racism and oppression has an impact on our experiences today. We're going to go a little bit into some of the basics of co-parenting, some things to look out for, some things to remember, in kind of a general overarching guideline for what you can do to kind of shift your focus and keep your focus on positive outcomes. We're going to talk a little bit about different approaches to resolving conflict. A lot of I think research or things on social media often kind of go back to how to co-parent or how to parent with a narcissist. And we're going to kind of look into that a little bit more and talk about really what strategies can you use if your co-parent is a narcissist or has narcissistic tendencies. Because really, I think a lot of times not everyone has a formal diagnosis of narcissism, but we can acknowledge that there are some people that are just really, really challenging to work with. So some of the tips that I talk about in this section is going to apply. And then we're going to talk about how we can shift our perspective and kind of what goals can we set and what are realistic goals that we can set for ourselves and our families moving forward. So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. There is a fabulous YouTube video that goes into it more in depthly. But ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, are something that back in the 90s, the CDC, the Center of Disease Control in Kaiser Permanente, had done a study, and they were able to identify that there are certain experiences that we have as children, as youth, and what they found is that they have a tangible, real impact and outcome for our health as we become adults. So some of these examples are having experienced physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, experiences of severe neglect. So whether that's not having your physical needs met or not having your emotional needs met, that can include a high level of exposure to domestic violence in the home. So that's a form of emotional neglect. And also household dysfunction. So if you were a child, or if your child is exposed to people struggling with mental illness around them, or have had a parent or a loved one incarcerated, actually there it is, mother being treated violently, the piece around domestic violence, children or youth who have seen their parents struggle with substance misuse and addictions. And then you do see there too divorce. And one of the things I also want to say is divorce does imply the marriage of two people, but for the purposes of this presentation and for the purposes of co-parenting, it's really important that we acknowledge that co-parenting is not just between an ex-husband and an ex-wife, right? Co-parenting can happen between two parents who were never married. Maybe they cohabitated. Maybe they never cohabitated. Maybe co-parenting is between one parent and an auntie, or a parent and a grandparent, or a parent and an older sibling. So co-parenting can look very different. So I don't want the term divorce to pigeonhole us into thinking that co-parenting is just about a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. It really means so much more than that. And we're actually I'm gonna be putting on a video for us to watch, and that's kind of addressed and talked about a little bit. So what kinds of outcomes, what kind of real physical outcomes do we have as adults if we've experienced adverse childhood experiences, a significant amount of them? Or what is the potential for our own children to maybe have to deal with as they grow up, if they continue to experience all of, or many of, the ACEs that were outlined in the previous slide? So some things can be a lack of physical activity or obesity. People who have experience a lot of ACEs may also develop a dependency on substance use, so drug use, smoking, alcohol, missing work, struggles with their mental health, depression, suicide attempts, but also impacts on their physical health, so diabetes, stroke, cancer. So it's important to recognize that traumatic experiences and a lot of these emotional struggles, we hold them in our bodies, right? So if we can mitigate some of those exposures for our children at a younger age, so if we can, for example, for the purposes of this workshop, if we can minimize the amount of conflict or stress or anxiety that our children are facing as a result of our co-parenting relationship, what we're actually doing is helping to set our children up for a healthy adulthood. Okay, so this is really around being able to understand and explain why co-parenting is so important and why it's so much bigger than just not fighting with the other parent, right? It is bigger than that. It does have an impact on our children, and that's why you're here. So thank you for being here. That's already showing that co-parenting is important to you, that if you're struggling, you're looking for ways to improve, or if you're managing your co-parenting relationship okay, and maybe you want to see if there are some extra golden nuggets in here, that's fantastic, because that's you saying you want more for your family. You want better for your child. So everyone's going through their journey. Again, thank you for being here. We see you, we hear you. That's why Kujanga wanted to put this on. So thank you. And you're here because you do see the big picture. So let's talk about some of the cultural implications. And I'm going to talk about it kind of from a Canadian standpoint, okay? But we're looking at, and as mentioned earlier, right, with Nicole's introduction, in the scope of co-parenting and Kujanga, we are acknowledging that the co-parenting experience can be very different for Black, Indigenous people of color and their families. Okay, so an example, it's available on the Stats Canada website. If we're looking at the number of lone parent homes, there is an agreement. If there is a plan, it's so key for us as adults to follow through with that plan and be consistent, so that when a child is thinking, okay, this is my weekend with mom, mom shows up on time, right, for the exchange. So consistency is key for your child to be able to make their schedule and their environment predictable and consistent. It's really helpful for them. So that's one less thing that they have to worry about. It's one less stress or anxiety that we're putting on our child. So if they know what's happening and we know what's happening, they don't have to worry about all those other stresses or emotions that can come up with surprises or unplanned events. Compassion, so important, right? So important, because life happens. As much as we want to be consistent, you may have a plan, a parenting plan in place, or you may not. But life does still happen. So someone can have an emergency at work. If someone is commuting on public transit for pickup and there's a delay on the subway, right? It's about being able to hold things in context and give a little grace, right? Try your best to understand. And I mean, if it's a pattern, that's one issue. But if it's, a one-off mistake, or if something got forgotten, right? It's around having a conversation and being able to move on past it without holding grudges. And we do need to be able to show compassion. And the hope is that we would also receive it in return. Celebration. This can be a tough one. We want to celebrate our child, and we want to celebrate our co-parent. And this goes back to wanting. We do want well for our co-parents. Now, we may not be with them. For example, say it's a mother and a father, right? You may not be in a relationship together, but you're still in a relationship because you're co-parents. So your relationship looks different, right? You left that union, but you didn't leave your family, right? You may not be romantically involved, but they're going to be in your life because they are an important adult to your child, right? So we want to be able to celebrate when things happen. So if your child comes home, or if you pick them up and they say, oh, I did this with grandma, I had so much fun, your response, you want to try to be like, wow, that's great, I'm glad you had so much fun at grandma's, right? We don't want to put our negative feelings about that other adult, we don't want to put that on our children, right? Because for them, they're important to them. And we want our children, what more do we want for our children? We want them to feel loved. We want them to enjoy their time and know that there are all of these adults that care for them, right? It's not for us to tarnish that. Because we don't have the best relationship with them doesn't mean our child doesn't have to have a good relationship with them, right? So, in the co-parenting space, you'll see this, you'll hear this a lot, right? Love your child more than you hate your ex or your co-parent, right? Because if we can start from a place of love for our child and what we want best for our child, sometimes that can help break that like gut reaction, right? Or that feeling of, especially if you have a really negative relationship, or there has been personal trauma for you with that person that you haven't been able to resolve yet, right? We want to be able to focus on celebrating not just the child, but the other person too, in the context of them being someone else that their child loves, that your child loves. So at this point, I'm going to ask Nicole and Jasmine if we can go to the first question in our survey. Now that we've talked about kind of the basic elements of co-parenting, or 5 C's, I'm curious to see where you feel you might be struggling most with. So I'm wondering, Nicole, if you could bring up our first survey question. Excellent. So which of these 5 areas do you struggle with most in your co-parenting relationship? Oh, do I get to answer as well? I'm going to say this one, I guess I can answer. And we'll wait a few moments, and Nicole may come on, or she might be able to post our responses. Okay. Communication, yes, that is a tough one, right? 80% said the biggest struggle in co-parenting is communication, which is great because we're actually going to, I'm going to share a little bit of a decision tree with you closer to the end of the presentation around to help guide you in when is the best time to communicate. It's a fun little exercise, but I'm hoping it's helpful for you. Let's see if we can go to, there we go. Okay, so this is a workshop. And we did talk about those 5 C's, and you have said loud and clear that of those 5 areas, communication is the biggest struggle that you have. So we are going to, I'm going to say break for 2 minutes, but what I'd really like you to do, what I really encourage you to do, because again, this is a co-parenting workshop, grab a piece of paper, grab your phone, and take 2 minutes to think about a situation where you struggled. And if it's communication for you, or if it's not being able to celebrate that other person, think about how you did respond in that one example where you struggled with communication maybe. And also think about how you might have been able to respond differently, knowing that, you know, the impact it can have after we've kind of already gone over ACEs and other important aspects of co-parenting. So we have just over a minute. I'm gonna mute, take some time to think about it, write it down, just a little bit of reflection time for you. Okay. Thank you very much. If you're, oh no, I don't want to start this timer again. If you're open, you're more than welcome to share in the chat, but this workshop is for you. So you can also keep your reflections to yourself. It's really just something for you to think about. And you're here watching this workshop because you do want to make some change. So it's important to take the time to stop and pause and reflect sometimes. So, common struggles. Number 1, inconsistent communication. So I'm not surprised that the majority of the responses were around difficulties with communication. That's something that comes up a great deal. A lack of cooperation, so not being able to agree or come to a consensus on an issue. A lot of one-sided parenting, where people will express that they feel like their co-parent is not pulling their weight, right? And Joelle talked about that a little bit, and about historically kind of how people view fathers, right? And we all know that that's not the experience of everyone, but it is an experience that's widespread enough that it comes up a fair bit of time. The struggle is not having a parenting agreement or not following an agreement, right? We can talk about the importance of having something outlined. It's going to come up a little bit when we discuss some tips on co-parenting with someone with narcissistic tendencies. But it can be hard if you don't have an agreement. How can you be consistent, right? Or if you have an agreement and they're not following through, that's even more frustrating. Safety issues. So this is more about, we cannot like somebody. That's reality. That's probably why you're co-parenting, because you know that there are elements about you already knowing you can't parent together. However, there's not liking someone and being concerned for your child's safety while they are in that other person's care, right? So that's a completely separate conversation, and that's where children's aid or child welfare could get involved. But that is a struggle. So it's about hashing out, okay, what are your concerns? What are your safety concerns, right? Is it something that can be mitigated? Is it something that can be addressed? Is it something that involving community supports can help, right? Do you have real significant concerns about your child being at risk? Because that would open an entirely other conversation. And maybe you don't have an agreement, or you don't have a process for how you're going to resolve conflict, right? Who are you going to turn to? Sometimes it's helpful to have a third party, so someone that you both trust, who's willing to kind of help you work through those things. This is where it may be helpful to seek out the help of a counselor, right? Furthest end on the spectrum, if you do need to go to court, that's kind of the last option, because it's really difficult and it's very intrusive. And in all fairness, going to court isn't always accessible for a lot of people, right? Because it costs money, it costs time. So it's really around finding ways, or finding people in the community or services in the community, just like through Kajanga or through myself, to be able to help you navigate those conflicts. And there are also huge benefits to co-parenting, right? When we're able to co-parent effectively, kids can be kids, right? We don't want our kids sending messages to the other person. We don't want to tell our kids something and say, don't tell this. Like, that's just putting more weight and more burden on our children, and we don't want to be able to do that. So if we can have a positive co-parenting relationship, then you're actually giving your children an opportunity to be kids, right? And just know that they have people who love them, and they have adults who are going to keep them safe. And then they can be kids, right? They're not, if you're frustrated, or if you're upset, right? That's where we turn to our own support system. Turn to your friends, turn to your family, turn to your counselor, right? And then kids can have positive, meaningful relationships with you and with their other co-parent, right? So we want to make sure that our children know that they have positive people in their lives, and that they're not seeing these other adults in a negative light, right? We don't want to skew their perception. We want them to know, especially if everybody is being safe, we want them to know that they have adults that they can turn to. And it's also building a foundation for resiliency, right? So as much as divorce was listed as one of the ACEs at the beginning of the presentation, divorce doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have a negative impact on your child, but it's how we support that child through the divorce, how we talk to our child through this family separation, how we help them to understand, that it's not their fault, right? How we help them to understand why this is happening and how it's part of their story. And if we're able to do that openly, transparently, in a way that's age appropriate for the child, and if they're able to hear that from both their parents, from their co-parents, right? What we're actually doing is we're showing our child that yeah, life is tough. Life is hard. And sometimes things happen that you can't control and that you don't want to happen, right? But that is life as adults. That's what happens. And even though this thing has happened to you where, you know, you have to live in 2 houses or 3 houses or whatever the arrangement is, um, you have people who love you and who care for you, right? We're all here for you and we're working together because we love you, right? So it's about showing them and modeling for them that they can go through hardship, but that they have adults who care about them, who can hold space for them and help them work through that. So, you know, being able to co-parent is actually a great way to build resiliency in your child. Yes, there's more benefits. So it also increases their social competence, right? So they are going to get to see what positive, respectful, healthy communication can look like if you can find a way to make that work, right? They're going to see you set boundaries for yourself, and in turn, they're going to learn to do that, right? And I've said this before, but kids don't always do what you say, right? But they do what you do. So we can yell at them, we can tell them to do ABC, right? But if they're not seeing that modeled, if they don't see you modeling that behavior, they're not going to buy in, they're not going to invest, right? So they don't do what you say, they do what you do. So what we want to do is we want to show them what a healthy relationship can look like. It doesn't have to be a romantic one, but let's show them how healthy adults communicate and what that can be. And overall, so children who, if we're looking at families where there are multiple households, right? When there is no conflict, those children tend to do better versus children who are exposed to conflict in these multiple homes, right? So their psychological well-being, their mental health is more intact, they're less likely to get involved with the wrong crowd or use drugs or alcohol, and they're more likely to do well in school, right? So we really want to be able to minimize that conflict that they're exposed to. Yes, before we get into conflict resolution, I'm wondering, Nicole, if you can pull up the second survey question, please. This question is really looking at or asking you to think about, how do you think you typically address conflict? So when something comes up, do you have a style? Do you have kind of a fallback that you always go back to? So is there a way that you find that you tend to deal with conflict all the time? So I think Jasmine is working on, oh, there it is. So when there is conflict with your co-parent, how do you typically approach it? I should click mine. So now that I clicked my answer, I can't read I can't read the options for you. So please read the options. It's really, and these are the 5 kind of, oh wait, how do I manage it shouldn't say the 5 C's. I've got to edit this slide. Ignore that it says the 5 C's because they don't all begin with C. Oh, okay. Yes. So we have avoid the conflict. Yep. And compromise. So those are, I was expecting a little bit of a, I guess, a variation in responses, but that's great. So what we're actually going to talk, see, the 5 C's isn't going to go away. Okay. So clearly accommodating does not begin with the letter C, everybody. But let's talk about accommodating. So there are pros and cons to each approach in how we manage conflict. Okay, so and I can't remember the name, but this approach is typically used in human resources, so in managing conflict. But when we are accommodating, the benefit is we are looking out for the feelings and the emotions of the other person, right? The negative part is when we accommodate, we let go of what our our values or what our expectations are, or our wants or our desires, right? We push that aside and we put the other person's feelings at the forefront. So the benefit, if you're someone who tends to accommodate someone else's request, the benefit is you're looking out for their emotional and mental well-being. But, you know, the struggle is you can start to build resentment if you keep essentially accommodating and not holding a boundary for yourself, right? So we don't want resentment to build. So again, it depends on the situation. Avoiding. So yes, people said they avoided conflict. What's the pro of avoiding conflict? There's no conflict, right? So the pro for it is that there isn't an escalation. You get to avoid it escalating, right? But very similar to accommodating, if we avoid, again, you're allowing the opportunity for resentment to build, right? And with accommodating, if you often accommodate the other person, it's not even just resentment, but there's a possibility that other party can start to exploit the fact that they recognize that you just accommodate their every request, right? So depending on the situation, for example, avoiding, maybe, you know, you have to pick up the child and then you have an appointment to get to, but when you get there, the other person isn't there with the child, right? Like, you're frustrated, you have to take the child somewhere, you're on a schedule, but at this point, you're going to avoid the conflict because you just got to go. So as soon as they get there, avoid the conflict, go, and then you can deal with it later. Like, you wouldn't want to escalate that conflict at that time, right? So it's really about trying to figure out what to do when. Compromising for a solution is great because what it does is it's more of a short fix, right? If you each compromise and come to an agreement on something, theoretically, you're able to kind of do that fairly quickly. But the negative part about compromising is oftentimes you're both kind of left feeling like it didn't work out. Like, you both didn't get your way, right? The good thing is, if you're compromising, you may both feel like you didn't get your way, but chances are you made a decision that was best for the child. So compromising can be a really good option to manage conflict if it's something that you need to kind of deal with in the short term, right? So you might not feel so great about it because you let go of ABC, and the other person might not feel so great about it because they didn't get everything they wanted either. But the benefit is you probably came to a pretty good decision for your child. Competing. So again, the benefit of competing is it might be able to be addressed quickly if once someone's trying to one up and kind of take the cake, but the long-term effects of competing can be negative, right? So if you're always kind of going at each other, trying to one up one another, long-term, it's going to have negative effects. Now, collaborating is really, and it's one of the original 5 C's. So I need to remove the 5 C's off the top of the slide, but collaborating is really that is the ideal, right? Because when you collaborate, the difference between compromising and collaborating is compromising, you're each giving up part of your position to come to a middle ground, but collaborating is you working together to find a solution that you both buy into, right? So collaboration is the ideal. However, the downfall with collaboration is it can be time consuming to do, and it can be energy draining and emotionally draining. So it's really around, so collaborating would be something you might want to do if you're actually forming a parenting plan, right? You want to be able to collaborate and work together and come to an agreement that works for everybody. But to do that work takes time, takes energy, takes emotional labor. Whereas compromising, you can probably come to something a little bit quicker. So those are some of the different ways you can manage conflict. Now, the piece around co-parenting with the narcissist, I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the presentation. So again, it's not everyone has a diagnosis of narcissism. So there's that. But what it can really mean is that you're co-parenting with someone who really thinks the world revolves around them, or is just really difficult, or that maybe they're really stubborn, right? And it can be really frustrating when you're trying to make decisions or come up with agreements, or just agreeing on something, right? If they're always pushing back, and if it feels like the focus is always on them. So the 5 tips here are really around getting focused. So you want to focus on a plan. And it's so important if you're co-parenting with someone who has narcissistic tendencies, having a plan is really helpful, because one, if you have a third party in the room who's helping you create this plan, they may be on better behavior, right? Because they're not only dealing with you, but they're dealing with a third party. So they may be more willing to work together, or at least behave in a way that is kind of manageable for you if you have a third party there. So it's so important to have a plan, so that there is an outline of expectations and kind of rules to follow. You also really want to be able to focus on yourself, right? You need to know what your own boundaries are. You want to take care of your own emotional and your own mental health. It's really important that you know who your support people are. Who can you call when you're really frustrated and need to swear up a storm and let it out? Who can you call to cry, on their shoulder and just say you're frustrated, right? And this is so important, because if you haven't figured out what your own plan is for your self-care, right? Where does that end up going, right? You hold it inside, you bottle it inside, and then what we can often see is it ends up getting taken out emotionally or in other ways on the child. So really being able to focus on yourself and develop your own plan for self-care, and know who your teammates are, who are your support people. And that could be people in your family, that could be friends, that could be service providers in the community. But it's so important that you stop and take time to know and develop what your own plan for self-care is. You also want to be able to focus. So focus on your child. So that's really around, because if you're having challenges with this co-parent who has narcissistic tendencies, your child is probably struggling with those same things too, right? In the sense that it can be emotionally tolling, it can be emotionally exhausting. Is the situation unsafe? No. So that child is going to be with that other co-parent who might be very difficult to kind of live with or be around or work with. So when you're with your child, you really want to be able to focus on them and their feelings and their emotions, right? You want to be able to validate their experiences. You want to be able to focus on building their self-esteem and their confidence, because, and we're going to get into kind of a long-term plan in a few minutes, but when you think about it, your child is going to become an adult, right? Your child is going to grow up, and as they develop and as their brain develops, they're going to form that ability for abstract thinking and understanding other people's emotions and recognizing the complexities of issues, right? They might not see it all and understand it all as children, but as they get older, they're going to start seeing these patterns and behaviors, and they're going to start recognizing what that impact is on them as they get older, right? And then they're going to make a decision for themselves as they become adults as to kind of their level of contact and involvement, because our kids are our kids, but they're going to grow to be adults and they are their own people. So it's so important to be able to focus on your child and who they are today, and ensure that you as a parent or as a caregiver are able to validate their feelings acknowledge their stories, recognize their experiences, right? And be the person who can catch those feelings and those hard those hard experiences, or those tough experiences, or the frustrations that they're having, be able to catch that for them and be that safe place for them, right? And then as they get older, with experience and with time, they will come to realize that that they can come to their own judgments of their caregivers as adults, and then they'll be dictating what their relationship is with them moving forward. So you really just want to be able to focus on your child and who they are. Focus on your home. So co-parenting is ideal. It's not always realistic. You may have come across the term parallel parenting, and that's where this may need to come into play. So parallel parenting is really around minimizing your contact with the other co-parent as much as possible, because maybe you cannot find a way to communicate and work collaboratively, right? So parallel parenting happens when everybody is safe, the child is safe going to that other home, but if your relationship with that co-parent is so toxic to the point where you can't even communicate with them, then the big focus is you focus on your home, and then they'll focus on their home. And again, children are resilient, right? So you want to just be able to focus on your routines, create that predictability, create that safety, create those expectations for your child, so that they know that when they're with you, they know what to expect, right? And when you're validating their feelings and letting them know they're supported, they will also know what to expect when they go to the other home, right? So that's where having a plan is important. And if you're parallel parenting, you may just have to focus on what's happening within your own four walls, because that's what you can control. And you can't control what goes on there, but you can focus on what you're providing for your child, and you can focus on your child's own feelings and emotions. And the last part around co-parenting with a narcissist is you want to focus on the present, right? Just like we talked about earlier around how your child is going to grow up. They're going to form their own opinions. You can only do so much, right? Parenting is hard to begin with. To co-parent, it's even harder, right? We are going to stumble. We are going to fall. It is going to be difficult. This journey is not easy, right? Just when we think things are getting smooth, life throws us a curveball and we have to deal with something new again. And that's life, right? That's just life. And we have to kind of roll with it, and we have to be accepting of the fact that, especially if your co-parent is difficult to work with or has narcissistic tendencies, you have to accept, like, this is your reality. This is what it's going to be. So give yourself some grace, be kind to yourself, focus on the present, and really, actually, it's almost helpful. And this is where mindfulness and meditation is helpful and can come into play, because if we have a habit or a pattern of reacting a certain way to conflict, or reacting a certain way to frustration or struggle, we want to be able to use the tool of mindfulness, or use that ability to be conscious in the present and to be conscious in the now, to be able to shift ourselves from going to that place where we're very reactive, right? We want to, again, focus on the present, focus on the now, kind of reset yourself if you need to. Mel Robbins is an author, and she talks about counting backwards from 5, right? So step away, take a breath, count backwards from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and shift your focus, right? There are different ways. And even if mindfulness, if you can incorporate that into kind of your daily routine, that's amazing. But sometimes for us to get by, especially when we're working with someone difficult, we really need to just be able to focus on the here and now. So this is a fun little decision tree I have. I'm just mindful of time. Where are we? Okay, 8:12. It's a fun little decision tree for all of you, especially for the ones who express struggling with communication. I did get this from kidsinthemiddle.org. They're based in St. Louis or St. Louis. I don't know how to pronounce the city. Please forgive me. And this is just a fun little thing to kind of help reset you. So if you feel the need or the urge to communicate with your co-parent, let's start at the top. So you need to send an email or a text to your co-parent, right? Let's look down. Is it a child-related concern? So do you need to contact them about the child? No? Okay, so there isn't a need to send it. Okay, is it about the child? Yes. Okay, let's go down. Does it address one or two issues at most? No, it's like a whole bunch of issues. Like there are so many things I need to talk to them about. Okay, don't send that text. Don't send that email. Walk away, revise what you want to talk about, and then start again. But if it only does address one or two issues about the child, okay, let's move on. So is what I need to talk to them about, can I do it in a business-like way? Or can I be cordial about it? It's almost like a professional relationship, right? It's not a romantic relationship. You're not with them, but can I be businesslike? Can I be friendly? No, I can't. Ooh, okay, you got to stop, stop, walk away again, regroup before you send it. If you think you can be businesslike, okay, move on. Would it be easier if I just call them and have an actual conversation? Yes. Oh, okay, then call them, right? So you already know it's only about one or two things. You know you can be businesslike or cordial. It might actually be better to talk in person than go back and forth via text. Then just call them, and then you can follow up with a text or email afterwards. If it's not going to be quicker on the phone and you're still thinking a text message or an email or a DM is more appropriate, okay, let's go down. Is anybody hurt or somebody sick? If somebody's hurt, call, pick up the phone, call. If no one's hurt, okay, so now we're narrowing it down, right? We need to talk to them. It is about the child. It's only about one or two things. Yeah, I can be friendly. I can be businesslike. I can be, not emotional in my text. Nobody's sick. Okay, am I calm? Am I sober? Right? What state am I in right now? I am not calm. I am not sober. Okay, go stop. Stop. Regroup, revise, start again. But if you're calm, if you're sober, if it's an issue about the child, if you can be respectful and businesslike, nobody's hurt, it's not an emergency, go ahead, send away. So that's just a fun, I say it's fun, but it's actually really helpful. I mean, sometimes, because for some people, they can text incessantly or they can send message upon message upon message. But again, if it's something that's concise, that's brief, that's relevant, right? Ideally, you would be able to have those exchanges. But again, if it's about a bigger issue, if it's about more than one issue, or if it's not about the child, if it's about something else, then you got to stop and think of the best way to kind of share that communication. So what's next? Okay, so we've talked about kind of the 5 C's of co-parenting. We've talked about the impact that conflict can have on our children. We've talked about different ways to resolve conflict. We've talked about the cultural implications. What do we actually need to do to shift our perspective, right? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to, if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, which I hope that you do, because I hope you did some of that reflection earlier, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a brief solution-focused approach to how to shift your perspective. So one, like anyone who is struggling and needs help, you also need to want the change, right? You also you also need to want the help, right? Because people can try to help you, give you information, give you tools, but if you're not in a place where you want things to be different, if you're not in a place where you want change, then it's not going to happen. So the first thing you really need to do is make a decision, like, is this the co-parenting relationship I want moving forward? Is this how it's going to be, next month, 6 months from now, next year, 5 years from now? Is this the state I want to continue in, right? And if it's not, then you're making that decision, and you can make it now. Okay. What is the end goal? What do you want to see your co-parenting relationship to look like, right? For some people, it might be, oh, I have dreams that our co-parenting relationship is going to be wonderful, and maybe we'll have blended families, and we can be friends, and we can cheer them on at like the soccer game, or maybe that's your goal, but maybe it isn't. Right? Maybe the end goal is just, I hope we can have a parenting plan in place, and we can communicate respectfully, and not every engagement turns into a fight, right? We just want to be able to talk to each other about our child and not fight. That's an amazing end goal, right? So what are the steps to get there? So this is where, what I'd like you to do, I'm going to take a piece of white paper. What I'd like you to do is to think, if you have a paper, certainly you can draw it, but I want you to think of a spectrum, right? Where, I don't know if you can see this, 1 to 10, it might be backwards. I apologize. But on a scale from 1 to 10, I should go like this, 1 to 10, right? Where do you think you are in your co-parenting relationship, where 10 is kind of that end goal co-parenting relationship? This is like the gold star of co-parenting over here. And I wish I was better with tech. I could have made this much nicer for you, but this is what we're rolling with. So 10 is the most ideal co-parenting relationship. This is your end goal. And this is like huge struggles, the big struggles in your co-parenting relationship. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to mark where you feel you are with your co-parent on the spectrum. Okay. So let's say you feel like you're at everyth's backwards. I apologize. A 2 or a 3. Okay, let's say you're at a 3. I don't know how to draw this backwards. 3. So let's say you gave yourself a 3. Okay. So what do we need to do to get to the 10? Now, co-parenting is a journey. Life is a journey, right? In a workshop, you're not going to get from a 3 to a 10 right away, right? That could take a really long time, and we may never get there, right? But I think the question that we need to ask ourselves, and the question you need to ask yourself and be more realistic with, is, if I'm at a 3, as an example, maybe you're at a 7, wherever it may be, but if you're at a 3, what could you do differently to get you to a 4? We're not aiming for the 10. 10 is down the road, right? But what could you start doing differently tomorrow to get you from a 3 to a 4, or from a 3 to a 3.5? Maybe it's, I am going to ask someone to be my fallback person who I can call or who I can text if I'm getting really frustrated, or you know what, maybe to get from a 3 to a 3.5, I'm going to try not to trigger send text messages to my co-parent. So how can I stop myself from doing that? Maybe you just ask a friend or another family member, hey, can I text you things before I send them to so-and-so, so that I have a break before I express something angry, right? So and that's just a small thing that you can do. Because, for example, if you can work on not being so reactive in your messages to the other person, then maybe they'll be less reactive back, right? I think the hard part about shifting perspectives is we can't control the other person. We can't control what they're doing. So the big shift in perspective is really a reflection on you for yourself, right? And what can you start doing differently that brings you that much closer to how you want your co-parenting relationship to look in the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because you have a child together. They're likely going to be in your life for the rest of your life, right? So what small things can you do? Again, we're not looking to jump from the 3 to the 10 or even a 3 to a 6. Just start with a 3 to a 3.5. Maybe it's being, I will make sure that that I'm on time for pickups or for exchanges. I'm going to make sure that I'm always 5 minutes early, right? So the goal is to just not be late anymore. So it's just finding one small thing that can get you that much closer. And then when you're there, when you're finally like, oh, I actually feel like I'm at a 3.5 now. Okay, what do I need to do to get to a 4? Right? We can't make big drastic changes, but if we make a lot of small little changes over time, we might be able to get there, right? So it's just about focusing on your next move. What is your next move? The next right thing for you to do, not what the next thing they're going to do, or not what do I need to do to perfect this entire situation. No, it's just what is the next one small thing we can do. Because again, number 5, be graceful with yourself. We're all human. We're juggling 50 million things. And if we, again, put it in context, right, we could be struggling with financial strain. We could be struggling with our own mental health issues. We could be struggling with conflict with other members in our family. We could be struggling with illness, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. There's so many different stresses and so many different things that we juggle as parents and as co-parents that really the important part, and if I can help you take away anything, is to just kind of slow down, because big change isn't going to happen quickly. But if we can slow down and start focusing on yourself, we can start to make some small changes, which over time will make a bigger difference. So as we come to an end, as we start wrapping up, I encourage you to think about 3 things, even just one. If all you can do is think of one, take a moment and think about something that you're grateful to that other person for. And I know it can be hard, especially if your relationship has been really tumultuous. But it could be even a positive memory of when you worked together, or a positive memory of when you were able to work together, right? It might be a skill they have. Maybe they make your kid's favorite dish, right? Like, I'm so grateful that so-and-so, that my child loves this person's casserole, right? Or I'm so grateful, like, how amazing is it? Like, they're actually really good at art. And it's so nice that, they can get our son or daughter or nephew, niece, or grandchild, excited about art, right? This can be tricky, right? I know I've seen it as a co-parent. Sometimes my kid is so stubborn, and it reminds me of my co-parent. And as much as I'm struggling with that and how stubborn they are in the moment, how frustrated I am, you know what? I'm actually really grateful that they have that, because as they get older, that tells me that they're going to be someone who's going to put their foot down. They're going to be someone who's going to voice their opinion, right? So it might be frustrating for you in the now, but seeing that trait in your child could be a really good thing if you think about it in the long term. Maybe there was a time they helped you out. They switched a day for you. They picked up, the child one night. Or maybe it's something as simple as they made it to an exchange on time. Maybe they offered to help you out with something and you didn't even have to ask, right? So, and a mistake they made that made to a lesson. Maybe it's just being thankful to them for showing their true colors so that you could no longer be in a relationship with them, or you have now been able to create space from them because of a mistake that they made that has led to this. So there are so many different ways to think about how you can feel grateful, how you can show appreciation, because in the end, they are in your life and they are an important person to your child. So if we can also make efforts to view them differently for ourselves, that'll also help us as we try to shift our own perspective moving forward. And then mini challenge. Tell them something you're thankful for. Pick up your phone, send a text now. Hey, I was just thinking about it. I really appreciated that time that you picked up so-and-so for me. Thank you. Right? It's just a small, short text, but extending that olive branch might go a long way. And that could be what takes you from the 3 to the 3.5, right? So, take a deep breath, pick up your phone. If you want to text them just to say, hey, thanks for helping me out that day. It's an olive branch and hopefully can open the door to more positive interactions. So that wraps up this workshop. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. I hope that you were able to find something that was helpful for you, something that you can take with you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Kajanga. Please feel free to reach out to me. My information is below. And I thank you very much for having me.